3 meters long by 2 meters wide. That is the entire reality left to the man who for 13 years believed he owned Venezuela. Nicolás Maduro Moros, held at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, spends hours each day in complete isolation inside a cell that barely exceeds the size of an average bathroom. And when night falls, according to prison sources confirmed this week by the Spanish newspaper ABC, screams echo through the ward. "I am president. I have been kidnapped by the United States." The psychological crisis that the former Venezuelan dictator is experiencing is not only believable, it was absolutely predictable. Because when you go from ordering torture, from denying lawyers to political prisoners, from living surrounded by luxuries stolen from the Venezuelan people, to cleaning your own metal toilet under the daily inspection of an American guard, mental collapse is inevitable. Welcome to Punto de Quiebra al Minuto. I am Laura Salazar, and today we are going to go deep into the most impactful details of what Maduro is living behind bars. Verified information, precise data from the judicial file, and testimony from those who know the inner workings of the prison that has become his worst nightmare. The Special Housing Unit, known by inmates simply as the SHU, is not just any section of the Metropolitan Detention Center. It is the space designated for administrative segregation of high-risk detainees, and it also functions as a punishment area. Maduro was placed there from January 5th, not because he violated prison protocols, but because his status as a public figure makes him a potential target. In that Brooklyn facility, there is a large Hispanic population: Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Colombians, Venezuelans. Any one of them could recognize him, and federal authorities have a responsibility to prevent attacks against his physical integrity. But that protection comes at a brutal cost to his mental health. Let us imagine the scenario. You wake up in a cell with gray walls, a fixed metal bed frame anchored to the floor, a mattress between 7 and 10 centimeters thick that barely softens the cold of the metal beneath. Next to you, a metal toilet with an attached sink. No privacy, no human warmth, no conversations. A small window, barely a slot, reminds you that a world exists outside, a world you are no longer part of. And that is how 23 of every 24 hours pass, completely alone. Mornings in the SHU begin with a humiliating routine for someone who believed himself untouchable. A guard verifies that you have cleaned your toilet, that your cell is tidy. Maduro, who openly mocked Venezuelans who cleaned bathrooms in the United States, must now clean his own under supervision. History has this capacity to become painfully poetic. Breakfast arrives at 6 in the morning, lunch at 11, dinner at 4 in the afternoon. Small portions, strictly controlled. You cannot ask for more food. You cannot save anything for later. You must eat inside your cell and return the tray within the allotted time. But what is truly breaking the former leader is not just the physical isolation, it is the brutal contrast between what he was and what he is now. For 25 years, he exercised power in Venezuela, first as foreign minister, then as vice president, finally as the strongman of Chavismo. He decided who ate and who went hungry. He ordered arbitrary detentions, denied due process, kept political prisoners in solitary confinement for weeks. And now that same person is subject to a prison regime that ironically respects his fundamental rights more than anything he ever granted his victims. He has elite attorneys, he has received consular visits, he receives medical examinations when he requests them, everything he denied to thousands of Venezuelans. Venezuelan attorney Nisar El Faqui, who has followed the case with direct access to the judicial file, confirms that conditions in the SHU are particularly severe, so severe that the Federal Bureau of Prisons has had to implement specific suicide prevention protocols for inmates in that section. The manuals exist, the psychological containment techniques are documented, but at the end of the day, no instruction manual can prepare you for the emotional collapse that comes from going from absolute power to absolute confinement. And here enters the climatic element that further aggravates the situation. New York experienced record temperatures during January, February, and March of this year. Snow, storms, extreme cold. Inside the MDC, complaints about insufficient heating are constant. The facility absorbed more prisoners than it was designed to hold after the closure of another detention center that had deteriorated severely. More inmates, same staff, same infrastructure. The metal objects in the cell, bed, toilet, sink, generate an even colder thermal sensation. And Maduro does not have the clothing he would want to protect himself from the cold. 3 times per week, according to the prison manual, he is entitled to go out to a small yard. It is not exactly an outdoor space in the traditional sense. It is an enclosed area where he can have brief contact with the outside for a few minutes. There, in that limited space, he has been able to interact briefly with other inmates who are also in the SHU. Short, surface-level conversations, because everyone in that section understands they are being monitored constantly. But even those minutes are a relief compared to the endless hours of solitude in the cell. And what do you think? Do you believe Maduro is receiving the treatment he deserves, or do you feel his conditions should be different? Leave your answer in the comments because I want to know what the Venezuelan community thinks about this situation. Communications with the outside world are severely restricted. Maduro can make phone calls, but only 10 to 15 minutes per day. All calls are monitored and recorded. To make a call, he must have funds loaded onto his assigned account, pre-identify who he wishes to contact, and obtain authorization. When it involves family members or associates who are also linked to federal investigations, such as his son, Nicolás Maduro Moros, the supervision intensifies considerably. This is why the claim by Nicolásito that he speaks frequently with his father and that his father is solid and strong is highly implausible. According to legal sources familiar with these procedures, communications are most likely indirect. Maduro sends messages through his attorneys, who then transmit them to the family, and vice versa. Direct calls with his legal defenders are protected by attorney-client privilege and therefore not monitored. But regular, fluid, direct contact with his close family circle, especially when several of them have pending charges or are under investigation by American authorities, that is highly unlikely. Regarding Cilia Flores, details about her conditions of confinement have been less accessible. She is in the same Metropolitan Detention Center, but in the women's wing, also under administrative segregation in the SHU. No conjugal visits are permitted at the MDC. No encounters between inmates from the male and female wings are allowed. The only confirmed occasion on which both were able to see each other was January 30th, when they received the consular visit ordered by the judge. That consular visit was a complex process requiring coordination between the State Department, the Department of Justice, the prosecution, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and the court. There are no formal diplomatic relations between the United States and the government represented by Delcy Rodriguez. There are no accredited ambassadors or consuls on American territory. Therefore, Venezuelan officials had to be specially authorized to enter the country, conduct the visit under strict protocol, and depart. Everything was recorded in the judicial file. That day, January 30th, 2026, Maduro and Cilia were transferred to the meeting room designated for encounters with attorneys or authorized visitors. It was likely there, in that moment, that they were able to see each other face to face for the first time since their detention. The real drama, however, is not limited to the physical conditions of confinement. It extends to the legal battle that threatens to further complicate their situation. Because beyond the psychological collapse he is experiencing behind bars, Maduro now faces fierce opposition from the New York prosecution regarding the financing of his defense. At the end of February, Maduro's attorneys filed a motion requesting that the court authorize the use of Venezuelan state funds to pay their professional fees. Cilia Flores joined that request on March 3rd. The central argument: without access to those public resources, they cannot afford the elite attorneys they have retained, and if they cannot pay them, those professionals have warned they will withdraw from the case. The gamble was risky from the start. Filing a motion in those absolute terms, all or nothing, implies declaring under oath that they have no personal resources to finance the defense. And when you make a sworn statement before a federal judge, especially in the federal court for the Southern District of New York, one of the most important in the country, you are putting far more on the line than just the outcome of that specific motion. You are staking your credibility under penalty of perjury. The Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, had already previously rejected the request to unblock Venezuelan funds for that purpose. And now the prosecution returned with a devastating response, more than 40 pages arguing point by point why Maduro and Flores have no right to have the Venezuelan state cover the cost of private attorneys on American soil. The prosecution was unequivocal. No person criminally charged in the United States has the right to have their government of origin pay for their legal defense, and certainly not by claiming immunity or privileges based on titles that American authorities do not recognize. Here is the most serious problem for Maduro's defense. If the judge determines at any point that personal funds were in fact available and could have been used to pay their attorneys, that sworn statement becomes a potential perjury charge, an entirely new criminal exposure. They will have entered extraordinarily dangerous legal territory. And the judge overseeing this case, a 92-year-old magistrate with an impeccable judicial career spanning decades, is not known for tolerating questionable procedural maneuvers. Alternatives existed. OFAC expressly authorized Maduro and Cilia to use their own personal funds. There is also the possibility of a third party assuming responsibility for covering the legal fees before the court. The so-called narco-nephews, remember, had businessmen favored by Chavismo who financed their legal costs. Where is Wilmer Ruperti now? Why does no ally appear willing to expose their own resources to defend the former leader? The answer is obvious. Whoever pays those fees automatically falls under the scrutiny of American authorities, and no one wants that level of exposure. So, is it that Maduro genuinely does not have a single cent available? Or simply that he cannot move that money without uncovering the entire corruption network that sustains it? Because it is completely implausible to believe that someone who controlled for 13 years the resources of a petroleum-producing country, who permitted the systematic looting of billions of dollars, who lived surrounded by obscene luxury while the Venezuelan people died of hunger, is now in absolute poverty. The most likely explanation is that the money exists, but accessing it would mean revealing accounts, frontmen, financial structures he prefers to keep hidden. Because uncovering those funds would not only compromise his current defense, it would open new lines of investigation into money laundering, illicit enrichment, and the entire criminal architecture that sustained his regime. The attorneys he retained are not inexpensive. We are talking about elite New York firms that charge thousands of dollars per day of work. Barry Pollock, who leads Maduro's defense team, belongs to one of those exclusive firms that no average Venezuelan, not even any average American, could afford. The invoices by now must be astronomical. And those same attorneys are now telling the court, either we are paid with Venezuelan state funds or we withdraw from the case. If the judge denies the motion, as everything indicates will happen, and the private attorneys withdraw, Maduro and Cilia will have to receive public defenders. That will delay the process because the new attorneys will need time to familiarize themselves with a complex file, review evidence, and prepare strategies. There is a real possibility that the hearing scheduled for March 26th may be postponed precisely because of this procedural development. Though the judge could also decide to maintain the date and address this point directly at the hearing, do you think Maduro should receive public defenders paid for with American taxpayer money? Or should he resolve his situation with his own resources? I want to read your opinion in the comments. Meanwhile, life in prison continues its relentless course. Reports about weight loss are consistent with recurring complaints from other inmates at the MDC. Food portions are small, strictly controlled, and there is no possibility of asking for more. If you are also in the SHU, you cannot exchange food with other inmates or access the commissary where the general prison population can purchase some additional products. You eat what you are given at the times they tell you, inside your cell, and you return the tray. For someone accustomed to banquets while his people search for food in garbage bins, this must be particularly difficult to absorb. Regarding medical care, the MDC has an office for basic healthcare. Inmates can request attention for emergencies or serious ailments, but that does not mean access to private physicians, cosmetic treatments, or specialized care beyond what is strictly necessary. Those services are funded with American taxpayer money, and resources are limited. When Maduro and Cilia requested medical examinations at the start of the process, alleging supposed injuries sustained during the capture, they were attended to inside the MDC by the facility's own staff. The evaluations ruled out fractures or severe injuries, and everything was recorded in the judicial file. If Cilia Flores has dental problems, as some recent photographs suggest, she may receive care for pain or infections, but not necessarily the cosmetic or high specialization treatments she was accustomed to. There are no privileges here based on surnames or on titles that American authorities do not recognize. There are federal protocols, allocated budgets, and treatment that, while harsh, is infinitely more dignified and legally grounded than anything they ever offered their victims in Venezuela. The most painful irony for Maduro is precisely that. He is receiving the due process he denied to thousands of Venezuelans. Attorney Nisar El-Faqih, who spent years defending political prisoners in Venezuela, knows this reality better than anyone. He represented journalists, students, activists arbitrarily detained by Maduro's regime, people who could not learn the charges against them, who were brought before courts without having been able to speak previously with their attorneys, who remained incommunicado for weeks while their families did not even know where they were being held. And when El-Faqih demanded respect for the most basic due process in Venezuelan courts, who was he demanding it from? The Maduro government. To now see the architect of that system of injustice facing a transparent judicial process, with elite attorneys he himself chose, with authorized consular visits, with medical examinations conducted when requested, with a judge who closely monitors that his fundamental rights are respected, it is a historic reversal that is still difficult to fully process. Maduro is receiving procedural guarantees that he turned into dead letters during his years of power. And even so, the conditions of confinement are breaking him, because the SHU was not designed with the psychological comfort of its occupants in mind. It was designed to segregate, to protect, and to punish when necessary. And the psychological impact of prolonged isolation is documented in numerous legal complaints filed by other MDC inmates, prisoners who have reported emotionally unmanageable conditions, who have requested transfers to other facilities, who have experienced severe depressive crises. The Federal Bureau of Prisons had to update and strengthen its suicide prevention manuals specifically for the SHU. That gives you a sense of the gravity of the matter. And if those conditions are already extremely harsh for an average inmate, for someone who exercised absolute power for decades, the contrast is demolishing. Maduro went from deciding the fate of millions of people to not being able to decide even what time he eats. From living surrounded by flatterers and bodyguards to spending 23 hours a day without speaking to anyone. From banquets and luxuries stolen from the people to controlled portions of institutional food. From mocking Venezuelans who cleaned bathrooms in the United States to cleaning his own metal toilet under supervision. The nighttime screams that prison sources report, those cries of, "I am president, I have been kidnapped," are not merely the delirium of a broken man, they are the last desperate attempt to cling to an identity that no longer exists. Because there, in that cell of 3 square meters, surrounded by gray walls and metallic cold, Maduro is not president of anything. He is the inmate awaiting trial on drug trafficking and other serious federal charges. He is the man who will face a justice system that, unlike the one he controlled, actually functions. And do you know what is most striking about all of this? That even with all these harsh conditions, Maduro is receiving more dignity and respect for his rights than he ever offered his victims. The upcoming hearing on March 26th will be decisive. The judge will need to resolve the motion about defense financing, and that decision will set the course of the entire process. If the petition is denied and the private attorneys withdraw, we enter a transition phase toward public defenders that could take weeks. If the judge decides to maintain the current attorneys under certain conditions, the procedural calendar could hold. But what is undeniable is that every day that passes in the SHU deepens the psychological deterioration of the former leader. And there is no emotional survival manual that can prepare you for this. You can read all the instructional documents the Bureau of Prisons distributes. You can try to apply breathing techniques and mental control. You can pray, meditate, count the bricks of your cell 1,000 times. But at the end of the day, when night falls and you find yourself absolutely alone in those 3 square meters of space, with no one to talk to, with nothing to distract you from the crushing weight of your new reality, the collapse is inevitable. Maduro is living in his own flesh the justice he denied to others. He is experiencing the isolation he imposed on so many. He is feeling the powerlessness he systematically created for thousands of Venezuelan families. And although these conditions are not revenge but simply standard American prison protocol, the historical symmetry is inescapable. The torturer converted into a prisoner, the denier of due process now protected by it, the dictator facing the consequences of a real justice system. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, millions of people follow this process with a mixture of astonishment, satisfaction, and also grief. Because although seeing Maduro behind bars represents a triumph of justice, it does not return the dead. It does not recover the lost years. It does not heal the wounds of a destroyed nation. It is a necessary step. It is a historic moment. It is proof that impunity is not eternal, but it is only the beginning of a long road toward true reconstruction. The trial Maduro faces is not only about drug trafficking. It is about the criminal architecture of a regime that turned Venezuela into a narco-state. It is about systematic corruption that looted the resources of an entire nation. It is about alliances with terrorist organizations and international criminal networks. It is about decades of impunity that finally found their limit. And every day that passes in that 3 square meter cell, every night he screams that he is president, every morning he cleans his metal toilet, Maduro is writing the final chapter of his own downfall. The coming weeks will be decisive. On March 26th, we will see whether the hearing holds or is postponed. We will learn how the judge resolves the motion about defense financing. We will find out whether Maduro will have to accept public defenders, or whether resources will magically appear that he swore under oath he did not have. And above all, we will see how far a man can psychologically resist when he has gone from having everything to having nothing. Because this is no longer about political power. It is no longer about grandiose speeches or empty threats. This is about a 71-year-old man locked in 6 square meters of space, confronting the rawest reality of all, that everything he built was constructed on blood, lies, and crimes, and that now he will finally have to answer for it. The story of Maduro in the Metropolitan Detention Center has only just begun. The nighttime screams, the psychological crisis, the extreme isolation, these are only the first symptoms of a collapse that will deepen as the judicial process advances. Because surviving weeks of confinement is one thing, accepting that you could spend the rest of your life behind bars is something else entirely. And when that reality finally penetrates completely into his consciousness, when no legal resources remain to delay the inevitable, when the last scream of "I am president" fades against the gray walls of his cell, only then will Maduro truly understand the meaning of justice. I am Laura Salazar for Punto de Quiebra al Minuto. We will continue reporting every detail of this historic process, because Venezuelans deserve to know the complete truth about the fate of those who destroyed our homeland. We will see you in the next one.